What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and if you're enjoying the content here on my channel, then make sure you hit the like button and make sure you hit subscribe so you can help decide what direction the content on my channel goes in the foreseeable future. So while this technically takes place before the events of Dark Knight's Metal in terms of chronology, I consider it to be a tie-in. And the reason why is because this deals with the whole idea of nth metal in terms of what it's capable, what it can do, and why it's so powerful in the realm of DC Comics. Remember, when it came to Dark Knight's Metal, that basically amplified or really sort of expanded on the nature of nth metal. Prior to Dark Knight's Metal, nth metal was just this material that existed out there, but there wasn't really anything special about it. It had magical properties, and that was really about it. What Dark Knight's Metal does is it basically says that nth metal is permeated throughout the entirety of the DC multiverse, but it all originates from the dark multiverse. And so it's cool because what this also does is it sees the return of one of the most powerful villains that existed out there in the realm of DC Comics. Now, initially, we basically just pick up with these beings that look very similar to Celestials from Marvel Comics in terms of their physical form. In the middle of all this, while the Green Lanterns are sort of wrestling with the fallout of the whole fractured story arc, which basically saw the alliance between the Green Lanterns and the Sinestro Corps coming to an end. Some members of the Sinestro Corps staying with the Green Lanterns, but a good portion of them basically leaving and taking off into space. What this means is the Green Lanterns numbers are basically down to almost zero again. Keep in mind that when most of the Green Lanterns were kind of shunted off to the beginning of all things, to the beginning of time more or less in the universe, what it did is it allowed the Sinestro Corps to sort of rise to prominence as a police force. But where Thal Sinestro himself was eventually defeated and believed to have been killed, the result is that his daughter Saronic took over the Sinestro Corps as a former Green Lantern. Now, where her father was very villainous in terms of how he ran the whole Sinestro Corps, she ran it as more of a superhero kind of team. And forming an alliance with the Green Lanterns, when that ended, it was all predicated on the idea that the child of Kyle Rayner, the Green Lantern, and Saronic Natu came from the future. That child was killed, and then Kyle Rayner didn't tell Saronic what happened. And the result is that she lost all trust in the Green Lanterns, sort of became a villain, declared herself the new Sinestro, and took off into space. We covered that with the whole fractured storyline. But the long and short of this is that the Green Lantern's numbers are still very, very thin. And so it's really left to John Stewart as the leader of the Green Lantern Corps to try to hold it all together. And so he's really doing double duty in a lot of different ways. On one side, he's going through and he's trying to make sure that what's left of the Green Lanterns still maintain themselves as a cohesive team, which by and large they're doing for the most part. The other half of this is that the universe still needs to be protected. There's still villains out there. There's still things that the Green Lanterns have to do, and they're trying to maintain that role. But in the midst of this huge, spark of energy that's more or less picked up by John Stewart, of course, he sends Kyle Rayner and he sends Hal Jordan to investigate. The problem is when they get there, what they end up finding is an entire star system has been totally obliterated. When this happens, of course, what we end up having are boom tubes that are opening. What immediately follows is not just the character of Orion, but omega beams. And omega beams are usually a direct indication of the presence of Darkseid. Now, one of the things that I want to talk about here is the character of Orion, because we've talked about him before. But for a lot of people who are jumping into DC Rebirth, Orion is a foreign concept to them. They don't really know anything about him. So when it comes to the new gods, you've basically got Apocalypse with Darkseid, and you've got New Genesis with Highfather. In the New 52, they're basically brothers, but the whole idea here is that they represent the very nature of the opposing dichotomies of good and evil. That's really what they are. Apocalypse is evil, New Genesis is good. Now, in a lot of ways, their motivations can be called into question. There are times where, the good guys, New Genesis guys, have done some pretty questionable things. But overall, despite what they might do in the short term, in the long term, they're good guys, they're heroes, and they function that way. Now, with the whole idea of these two opposing forces, inevitably, they went to war with one another. And they warred for like eons and eons and eons in order to basically construct a truce. What ended up happening is one of the beings that was part of the whole New Gods mythos called Metron had basically brokered a truce between the two worlds. What they would do is they would exchange their sons. And so what ended up happening is Orion, the son of Darkseid, was sent to live with Highfather, whereas the son of Highfather, Scott Free, was sent to live with Darkseid. That's the reason why Scott Free, Mr. Miracle, is kind of like a master escape artist, because the locks were so strong and so durable on Apocalypse that him being able to basically break out of those made him capable of breaking through some of the best, devices that exist out there in terms of locks and codes and different things like that. But Orion, being a member of the New Gods, has always been more or less the Prince of New Genesis, which is to say the adopted son, more or less, of Highfather, and the role he plays has always been the sort of on-again, off-again hero that's worked alongside the various superheroes. Now, the reason why I say on-again, off-again is just because of the fact that, remember, for years and years and years, the New Gods gods are basically isolated to their own line of comics, so you didn't see them cross over all the time, but it was usually always Orion who was like the liaison when it came to the new gods working alongside superheroes. But there's history here is really kind of the overall point that Robert Venditti is making here. It's not like the new gods are meeting the Green Lanterns for the very first time. Not only that, the last time these two groups met, Kyle Rayner was the White Lantern. He was the most powerful of all the lanterns who were out there. The funny thing about this though is that when Orion shows up, he's like, look, there's something hunting us in New Genesis, trying to kill off all the new gods. We need your all's help, and we really, really need the White Lantern. Like, if you guys know, if the White Lantern's here, get him, because like we could really use his help. We really need the White Lantern. And it's funny because Kyle Rayner used to be the White Lantern and he's not anymore. So it's kind of interesting. And of course, this basically falls on the shoulders of just the Green Lanterns to cope with on their own. But keep in mind, when it comes to the new gods, they are in a lot of ways almost immutable and indestructible. I mean, they can be killed, but it takes beings of immense power in order to pull it off. And so when the new gods show up and they're like, we basically need help, it means times are that dire, because under normal circumstances, Green Lanterns should not be able to take on and defeat beings that are capable of overpowering new gods. The problem is that things are just that bad. Now, of course, with these Omega beams basically hitting Orion, these Omega beams function in the exact same capacity that we're used to. Once they're sicked on a target, they find that target and they keep chasing after them until they hit them or until that target goes to a place that the Omega beams can't follow. On the surface, this looks like Darkseid. It looks like Darkseid has somehow reappeared. Darkseid's back and waging a war against the new gods. The problem with this is that once they basically get, Orion onto a stretcher, when they get him back, what ends up happening is his heart is more or less shut down. When his heart is restarted, when he's brought back, he immediately panics because he's like, all hope is lost here. This planet is going to be obliterated because the Omega beams are going to continue following him until they're dead. And again, the reason for this is because Orion is basically being chased by a giant machine of sorts, basically one of these celestials that sent these Omega beams after him, and that once it believed that he was dead, when his heart stopped, it backed off. But when he was brought back, it immediately started chasing after him again. So this thing appears to have been designed for the purpose of just tracking down and killing new gods everywhere it can find them. But notice this thing is wildly powerful. I mean, it's huge. It's monstrous in size. It's very much like a celestial from Marvel Comics, and it's really intriguing. Where the Green Lanterns face off against it as best they can, evacuating people out where they can, what we end up having is the head of the medical staff that was able to save Orion has effectively created a fake heart of sorts. It's really this idea that this heart can be used to basically continue circulating blood throughout the body of Orion while his physical heart is stopped. And so what ends up happening here is once they pull this off, once Kyle Rayner creates this construct and is basically able to use it to artificially continue pumping blood throughout the body of Orion, because his physical heart is believed to have stopped, this thing immediately backs off and it moves on to its next target. So again, constantly going after all these different new gods, tracking these guys down, taking these guys out. This is a pretty overwhelming force. Now, following this, once we get him back to the Green Lantern base of operations, that's when the information begins to come in. Remember, when it comes to Robert Venditti's, writing style, at least from what I've been able to see, a lot of it's kind of an introductory thing. Things going crazy, things going nuts, and then we start to get into the explanation. It's designed to grab us and reel us in. These massive machines are basically being referred to as golems. But the reason why I consider this to be a Dark Knight's Metal tie-in is because what it does is it picks up on two things. The first is the nature of nth metal in terms of the fact that it's one of the most powerful concepts that exists out there, but the second is also the character of Yuga Khan. Now, Yuga Khan, as most people probably don't know, is the father of Darkseid, but the way his history is done here is a little bit intriguing. When it came to the New 52 and the origin of Darkseid himself, Yuga Khan didn't really exist. He wasn't really there. Darkseid, as Yuxas, basically led a rebellion against the old gods, took them all out, and then him and Highfather went to war against each other, and that was the end of that. Yuga Khan is largely a pre-New 52 character, meaning a character who largely had a bulk of his appearances before 2011. Now, even before then, he goes all the way back to the 1970s, but you're talking about a guy who's appeared in DC Comics less than like 150 times. He hasn't shown up all that often, but the machinations and the schemes of Yuga Khan are, for the most part, always the same. He was the original god among all gods, the most powerful of all gods in existence. He ran Apocalypse with an iron fist. He was hardcore, he was ruthless, and he was cutthroat, but he desired to attain absolute power and tried to enter the source, basically the source of all energy of all beings that exist in the DC universe. universe. The result is that once he tried to pass through the source wall, like all other beings who have tried to enter the source, he was locked inside the wall and he was presumably stuck there for all eternity. What this does is it expands on that initial origin, and it basically says that what Yuga Khan also had was basically an army of sorts that was composed almost entirely of nth metal. And the reason why this matters is because no one believed this army was real. A lot of that was because when it came to Yuga Khan, because him being locked in the source wall had happened so long before the events of a lot of the modern day stories had taken place, the result is that he was largely believed to have just been a myth. But with the idea that Yuga Khan had basically been locked away in a source wall and was essentially trying to engineer his own escape, these machines effectively reactivated. This army came to fruition again with two main purposes. The first was to follow the campaign, follow the programming instituted by Yuga Khan to eliminate all individuals who could possibly take over as the ruler of Apocalypse in his absence, effectively eliminating heirs. The second of this was to bring Yuga Khan back. Now remember, right now when it comes to DC Rebirth, Darkseid is not Darkseid anymore. He's not there anymore. He's basically just a baby. He doesn't really pose a challenge. In terms of people who are capable of being able to take over the throne of Apocalypse in the absence of Yuga Khan, then it means Orion is the most logical person to do it, because Orion is the biological son of Darkseid. So a lot of history that's thrown in, a lot of the backlog of stories that have taken place. But following this, what they end up doing is they basically say, okay, we have to search his mind even further because we have to find out where Highfather is. Highfather, being the leader of all the new gods in New Genesis, is largely believed to be one of the more powerful of the new gods, right up there with the power of Darkseid. And so if the Green Lanterns are struggling against these golems, then of course Highfather is perceived to be their best measure of being able to take these guys out. Simultaneously, if they are hunting new gods, then it stands to reason they're hunting Highfather. And so because of this, once they track down where it is that Highfather may be at, the only thing they're able to gain is the name of a person called Lightray. Now Lightray is like the New Gods version of the Flash, and his character is actually pretty intriguing. He made his first appearance in New Gods #1 back in 1971, but like a lot of the other New Gods, he was given a pretty cool origin in the sense that him and Orion were extremely close friends. The issue here is that somewhere along the line, Lightray and Orion had basically discovered like an apocalyptic outpost or something like that was on New Genesis, and the result was that following a battle, Lightray was hit with like a whole bunch of solar radiation. He fell into a coma for a while, and when he popped back up, he had all these solar powers. He could basically manipulate light itself in a multitude of different ways. Now, one of the things that he did is he actually ended up pushing himself and kind of becoming the fastest of all the new gods. So in a lot of ways, Lightray was like Marvel's Makari. That was an Eternal who basically devoted all of his power to pushing his speed to the absolute limits. With Lightray, it's much the same way. But because of this, with Lightray being the fastest of all the new gods, he's basically able to traverse all through space and time using, his power of flight. But with Hal Jordan basically tasked with trying to track down Lightray and ultimately locate whether or not he actually has Highfather with him, the biggest hindrance he has is his constructs do not seem to be able to move as fast as Lightray's able to travel. Now, of course, this is actually a pretty amazing moment here, because while he's trying to pilot the ship, he basically ends up backing the whole thing down. He really just kind of slows down, and it seems like all hope is lost when he's basically met with an image of his father. Now, we're not told how he got here. It's basically this whole idea that his dad appears and offers these words of encouragement to Hal Jordan. I have faith in you, I believe in you, but it's a very touching moment, because one of the things that's really always emphasized when it comes to the character of Hal is his father always played an exceedingly large role in his life, albeit the fact that his father had died when he was younger. The result of this is that every time Hal Jordan flies, whenever it is that he goes on some mission or something like that, he needs to kind of pep himself up, prepare for what it is that's going to happen. His question is, what would my dad do? What would my father do in this situation? And again, it's a really beautiful and touching aspect of his character, because of course, where the question's asked, am I hallucinating you? What in the world is going on here? Instead of his father sort of being just this kind of general image, he speaks and moves as if he were actually there in real life. And he even goes as far as to say, I don't really know if you're hallucinating me or not. You're basically in the wake of a cosmic god that's flying at the speed of light. It's very ambiguous. It's very cloak and dagger, but it's not designed to answer the question, is his father really here? It's designed to emphasize the nature and the relationship between Hal Jordan and his dad, and how big of a role his father plays. And so again, because of the fact that his dad was courageous, because of the fact that his dad did whatever it took in order to achieve the goal, Hal Jordan follows the exact same path. And where he begins flying his ship, pulling up on the speed of light, what we also end up having is this warning coming from his construct that Hal Jordan is approaching a speed force singularity. What this means is that if he kept traveling faster, he would have entered the speed force most likely. Hal Jordan may have gained the powers of the Flash. It's cool. With him basically running into Highfather, running into Lightray, he basically says, look, I can take over from here if you guys need me to, I can help out. And it makes sense, because Highfather's response is, despite the powers of Lightray, while he is a new god, his energy is not infinite. Eventually he'll tire out, and with those Omega beams chasing them down, as he begins to slow, the beams do not slow down. With Hal Jordan grabbing Highfather, bringing him on board, and basically taking off between the two of them, it's interesting because these Omega beams are still following them. And in fact, Hal Jordan actually comes up with this pretty ingenious plan where the construct of Kyle Rayner is being used continually to basically maintain the construct that's serving as the heart of Orion. He's not really able to leave and not really able to go anywhere. Instead, what we end up finding out is that because of the fact that these Omega beams are chasing after the new gods, or at least, only those who are present in this immediate vicinity, chasing after Highfather, and because of the fact Orion is believed to have been dead, these golems move on to their second process, which is trying to free Yuga Khan from the source wall. Now, keep in mind, if Yuga Khan is freed, if this happens, then all hope is lost. Basically, everybody's gonna die. The other question that has to be asked here is, how does this coincide with the Darkseid War Shazam one-shot? For those of you guys who don't know, Billy Batson, also known as Shazam, really Captain Marvel back in the 1930s, derived his powers from a handful of different gods, all of whom basically spelled out the acronym Shazam. The issue is that during the original Darkseid War storyline, at the tail end of the New 52, Shazam got his powers from a new set of gods, one of which was Yuga Khan. The last we saw him, he was just kind of preparing to institute his campaign. So we don't really know how to bridge this gap between the last time we saw Yuga Khan and how he ended up in the source wall. I don't really believe there's a continuity error just because DC Rebirth plays continuity pretty close to the vest. It may be that that kind of thing gets fleshed out later on down the line, most likely when it comes to the return of Shazam himself, whether it's in a solo series or what have you, or if Yuga Khan manages to be freed from the source wall and then gives us this whole great big huge exposition on what it was that happened with his character and how he got to where he is, and DC gives us a whole backstory. But it's cool because remember, if Yuga Khan gets out, everybody dies. And so that's the first instance of the Green Lanterns, is to fight this war on two fronts. The first part is to stop all these different golems, and the second is to keep them away from Yuga Khan. So it's a pretty desperate scenario. Now, of course, with regards to Hal Jordan and Highfather essentially racing back, with the Omega beams following them, they basically play chicken. And it's a pretty genius maneuver here in the sense that Hal Jordan effectively dives out of the way just before the moment of impact, and the Omega beams hit one of the golems and completely incinerate them. Following that, it's a matter of trying to take out as many other of these beings as they can. Once they learn the weakness is basically the point in their chest, then it becomes a matter of just creating as many constructs as they can, as large as they can, and just hammering it away at it all until they can finally take these guys out. With all these different golems having been defeated, the final one appears. And so, of course, Highfather kind of jumps into the fray, and Highfather is able to crack the armor just enough for John Stewart to fire off a killing shot and to destroy this thing. But keep in mind, Highfather, while he is powerful, is not all powerful. He can be destroyed. But the fact that these things were designed for the purpose of destroying new gods meant that they had to have been designed for the purpose of destroying new gods of all power like Highfather. Otherwise, there'd be no purpose in creating that army. And so as a result, with the final golem having been destroyed, basically having been taken out, that impetus basically falls on Highfather to sort of, taunt Yuga Khan a little bit, say, hey, there's no chance of you getting out, and really sort of calling it a day. And so the story basically wraps up. This quick little involvement with the new gods and the Green Lanterns themselves sort of teaming up. Things kind of wrap up with Orion having his heart put back into his chest, everybody saying peace, thanks for helping out, and they go their own separate ways. Things wrap up pretty fast. It's not really one of these stories that was designed to set the stage for everything else that goes on and all these expansive things and all that kind of good stuff. Again, it's just one of these stories that's designed to remind us characters like Yuga Khan still exist. There are some pretty formidable threats out there. The source wall, all those things are still out there. So it is pretty cool. And it certainly is interesting in terms of what may come after this. But with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoy this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.